You know, it's pretty amazing that Cliff High and his webot can say like 2 years in advance, like literally 2 years in advance, watch the Italian banking sector. It's going to be in deep, deep trouble. Bank failings, massive bailout kind of stuff. You're going to see the Italian banking system going down the tubes. Specifically mentioning Italian banks out of all the countries in the world. He said, watch Italy in his reports. And I've already told you recently, of course, covering that story was numerous sites at the time, but we had 2 pretty decent sized banks in Italy fail. The EU said we will not be bailing out banks anymore. We will only bail them in with bondholders, whatever level bondholders. They're going to take the haircut first, right? Like they should. But when it's 6 to 8, whatever, $10 billion, or in this case, I think it was 17 billion they needed. That's a little too much for the bondholders to handle. So what did the EU do? We've got permission from ourselves to just skirt the law that we passed. The one that we said we would not do bail-ins anymore, or bailouts anymore. We're going to go ahead and do a bailout this time. Look, is anybody surprised? Like Willy Wonka would say, oh no, stop, don't, help, please. The suspense is killing me. So back on the banking sector in Italy, you surely didn't think just the 2 banks getting bailed out, oh, everything's fine again. Because they all got bailed out in 08 and 09, or not really 09-ish, right? So they did it again, bail out again. Surely didn't think that the party was over. Everything's fixed now. Now it's really, really, really fixed. We promise. No. Wolf Street, Don Quajones says, fears of doom loop. I like that term. Kind of has a sound, doom loop. You know what my doom loop is? Another bank bites the dust. That's Jason Four's doom loop, because I just loop it. Thank you. Fears of doom loop between Italian banks and government bonds resurface. Oh, you mean kind of like the bailed out banking thing resurfaced and 2 banks got bailed out. Oh. After 2 controversial bank rescue operations that stretched Europe's bank resolution laws beyond recognition, things are beginning to look a little less desperate for Italy's banking sector. The initial market reaction to the interventions has been overwhelmingly positive. For the first time in years, Italian banks are leading Europe's Stoxx 600 bank index upwards, not downwards. Wow. A bank bailout. Bank stocks rally. Who would have thought? Even the recent announcement of a capital raising and bad loan sale plan by the troubled bank Banca Carige was met with enthusiasm, sending its share prices up 30%. We have bad loans we need to dump off our books. They're toxic. Bank rally, 30%. Wow. What planet do we live on where bad news is fantastic news? Hey, your house just got blown away. Breaking news, insurance rates go down. Florida got hit with 2 hurricanes, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. Utter destruction, $50 billion in damage. Insurance rates, breaking news, insurance rates go down for homeowners. I mean, really? Would that really? Come on. One of the Italian banking sector's biggest problems, its sky-high bad loan ratio, will soon be under control, claimed Bank of Italy Governor Ignazio Visco in a recent speech to the Italian Banking Association. The interventions in Monte dei Paschi di Siena and the 2 Veneto-based banks, Popolare di Vicenza and Veneto Banca, will take almost 50 billion euros of bad loans off their balance sheets, leaving about 275 billion euros in the system. Within a year, Italy's non-performing loan ratio will be down to almost a respectable 8% of total loans, Visco said. So, Mr. Visco, where do these loans go? Do they go off to Never Neverland? Do they go into another dimension, a black hole? What about the derivatives tied to this type of stuff? Where do those go? What happens with those? What are you guys going to do with this? You're going to take the bad loans off the bank. You know, listen, I got a company. My company's not doing so well. Got a lot of debt. Would you mind taking off and wiping out my debt for me and letting me keep all the positive cash flow and all the profits coming in? Can someone just step in and wipe all my bad debt off my books for me? No, I know, I'm not a bank. I'm just a company struggling with a bunch of employees too. Can someone help me? No. You're not a too big to fail bank. You're not a part of the bankers club. None of you are. So you get a big fat zero. Actually, you don't get a big fat zero. You're going to end up paying for this. You don't get left with nothing. You're going to pay for what we're doing. Because, yeah, we got to get those bad loans off the balance sheet. But it doesn't just go away. Someone's going to have to pay for it. You pay for it in the front end or you pay for it in the back end. Someone's going to pay for it. And that person's name starts with T. And rhymes with axe payer. To that end, the government will create a new semi-publicly owned national asset management company known as NAMC or NAMC. That will help develop the market for bad loans. We're going to have a market for bad loans. You know, something nobody would ever want. We're going to help develop a market for bad loans. To lend the scheme legitimacy, European finance ministers rushed through approval of NAMCs for all Eurozone economies last week. These I'm just going to, can I just shorten it to NAM, like Vietnam, back in NAM, back on the Ho Chi Minh Trail? These NAMCs, we're going to call them, NAMCs, will vacuum up some of the non-performing loans from bank balance sheets and sell them at a discount on the secondary market. Again, I don't care if there is a secondary, a tertiary, millionary market. Who is in the market to buy complete toxic junk? There's only one entity. In case you haven't figured this out yet, I'm going to tell you. Central bank. Federal Reserve, European Central Bank, the central banks. That's who's going to be in that market. No one in their right mind would be buying up non-performing, garbage, toxic loans. I'll take that. I'll pay you 25%. These haven't performed and they never will. That's all right. I want them anyways. You're going to give me a discount on them. And I'm never going to collect on them. Right. Yeah, that's a good business decision. According to Visco, the only way speaking of Visco, you remember Ghostbusters 2, Part 2? Wasn't Visco the bad guy inside the damn painting? And the little guy with the accent? But I love you too. Remember that guy? Visco. Wasn't it Visco? Visco is now working in the government. According to Visco, the only way such a scheme would be useful is if it is applied on a purely voluntary basis and the assets are transferred at a price not too far from their real economic value, i.e., the value assigned to them by the banks. Well, you know what that value is going to be. Oh yeah, this ain't no toxic asset. This here is just, holding a smoldering pile of horse crap in her hand. This here's an asset. Oh, that ain't no asset. This here's an asset. It's worth a whole bunch. Oh, that's another pile of crap. Is this a fictional book? Am I reading a fictional book right now? Like some stupid, horror story kind of a thing? Like it's a, horror thriller? Cause this is thriller night. It's gotta be something. Cause this is not reality. There's no way that this is real. Like this cannot be. The only way it would be useful, the scheme would be useful, is if it is applied on a purely voluntary basis and the assets are transferred at a price not too far from their real economic value, i.e. the value assigned to them by the banks. Untold billions of euros of taxpayer funds will be used to make up the difference between what market participants are willing to pay for the bank's impaired assets and the price the banks want for them. This is the more covert part of Italy's publicly funded bank rescue program that shouldn't have been a bank rescue program. It should have been a bail-in, but like they said, we just don't apply the law in this case again, and we're just going to bail them out anyways. Which to start with was $17 billion to the taxpayer, who's now on the hook for that over there. Yet, even if this scheme, together with the recent bailout of MPS and bail-in of the two Veneto banks, which, excuse me, I know they may have said bailed in, but these were technically bailed out, helps to steady Italy's banking sector, the banks are still not out of the woods. Indeed, a whole new problem is already brewing. A pending Basel III reform package could eliminate the equity capital privilege for EU government bonds. This equity capital privilege essentially means that banks are currently emptied. Yeah, they're being emptied, all right. Currently exempted from documenting their equity capital for government bonds, as they are required to do for loans, corporate bonds, and other receivables. Until now, financial regulations have assigned a value of 0 to the risk of EU government bonds, regardless of the actual level of risk attached to the respective government debt. This equity capital privilege has enabled banks to finance the purchase of EU government bonds using third-party capital only by issuing their own bonds or using customer deposits. It's an easy way of making money that, together with the ECB's quantitative easing program, has helped to keep the yields on government debt artificially low, but it could be about to come to an end. The prospective new rules, and by the way, I just gotta stop for a second. As I read this to you, can you understand why I'm so positive about why people should hold on to precious metals and play these cryptos to get the hell out of this freaking system over here I'm telling you about? Yet we still have to rely on that system for our paychecks, rent. You know, we still got to use it. So if I got to use that stinking pile of garbage of a system, let me play over here with some of these cryptos, some metals, so that when the rainy day comes, again, fingers crossed, but I don't think we really need to cross our fingers, we'll be covered just fine. The prospective new rules stipulate that the lower the EU member states' rating, the higher the proportion of equity capital required when investing in government bonds. As a study by German Institute for Economic Research shows, Italian banks would be particularly hit hard by the rules due to the comparatively weak rating of Italian government bonds. On the collection date, they had a Fitch rating of BBB+. The Italian banking sector would have to substantially increase its equity base. For each euro invested in the purchase of an Italian government bond, the banks would have to finance 4 cents out of their own funds. Really? 4 whopping cents, huh? Wow. To put that into perspective, for Italian government bonds worth 100 million euros, a bank would need 4 million euros in additional equity capital. The total bill for the entire sector could reach 9 billion euros compared to 3 billion for French banks and 2 billion for German banks. This would leave the Italian banks with 2 far from attractive get-out clauses. Either they raise new funds from investors, something most of them have struggled to do in recent years, or they cull some of the Italian government bonds from their portfolios. Given Italian banks are the biggest owners of Italian government debt, just after the ECB, of course, second only to the ECB, this could have serious consequences not only for the banks, but also for the government. The interest rates on Italian bonds would rise, first due to diminished demand, and second because the risk premium on equity capital would also raise the cost of government bond purchases. Of course, the ECB could step in and take up the slack, but it has already tapered its asset purchases by 20 billion euros a month and purportedly plans to further taper them. If the banks can't raise new funds or sell off their government bonds at a survivable price, the government may be tempted to step in again. The problem here is that Rome has already earmarked 20 billion euros of public funds to save the banks, and the powder on that is almost dry. As the German Institute for Economic Research points out, expanding the rescue program would force up Italy's already vertiginous level of public debt, which grew to a fresh record in May of 2.28 trillion euros from 2.27 trillion just in April. The main goal of the new legislation is to disentangle the default risks between sovereigns and banks in the Eurozone, the infamous doom loop. The problem for Italy is that, aside from the European Central Bank, or ECB, its domestic banks are just about the only big-time market players left that are still willing to buy Italian debt at its current quantitative easing inflated price. If the new legislation is passed and they become net sellers at the same time as the ECB begins to scale back its stimulus, the price of Italian debt could return to reality with a very harsh bump. Thus, the change in bank capital rules designed to reduce the risks of the doom loop could be triggering, in doom loop fashion, a renewed sovereign debt crisis in Italy. Only two things keep these European banks alive. Read, many EU banks would collapse without regulators' help, says Fitch. And of course, I link all of these articles I talk about. I'll be linking this one from Wall Street, of course. And I will be on to the next one. Take care.